May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Give me Jesus, give me Jesus, you may have all the rest. Give me Jesus. With Thanksgiving right around the corner, and Advent beginning just after that, this week's gospel text feels a little out of place, doesn't it? We are a week away from preparing to welcome the Christ child into our midst, but today we have an image of Good Friday, the moment of Jesus' crucifixion as told by Luke. Jesus hanging on the cross, having his clothes torn off and divided among people, onlookers standing by for the sole purpose of watching him suffer, soldiers and religious leaders mocking him, a sarcastic sign above his head that says, "The King of the Jews," and a fellow criminal hanging next to him wondering aloud why, if he really is the Messiah, he doesn't simply save himself and the men on either side of him. It's not exactly a scene that inspires the holiday spirit, is it? And to top it all off, today is Christ the King Sunday, when we declare that it is Christ, not our government, not our churches, not even death, who is our King. Christ alone reigns in our hearts and our lives. But what kind of king dies such a horrible, humiliating, and painful death voluntarily? And how in the world are we supposed to get into the spirit of Advent? How are we supposed to celebrate the coming of the Christ child next week, when this week we are struck by the image of how this innocent child will grow up and ultimately die in this awful way? What kind of king is that? As I looked over the text for this week, I was admittedly a little put off by facing crucifixion at this time of the year, but as I thought more about it, it actually seemed appropriate. Jesus didn't die the way that he did by accident or happenstance. Jesus' crucifixion was a deliberate choice by the political and religious authorities to humiliate and violate and kill a man who threatened the established order of things. And somehow, we have to learn how to balance that reality with the fact that Jesus came to us, became in flesh, love incarnate in the form of a sweet, innocent baby. The fact is that this harsh, ugly gospel text, which falls right before Advent and Christmas, is a reminder to us that Jesus is the kind of king who intimately knows what it is to be a real person. From the moment he was born amongst cattle and laid in a feeding trough, Jesus identified with humanity, especially with the poorest among us. And while his birth and his life and his resurrection established for us hope and peace and comfort and joy and all those things we will happily talk about during Advent, he would still know what it means to suffer. In his death and in the days leading up to it, Jesus would know loneliness and pain and temptation and struggle. And perhaps this is exactly the kind of reminder we need as the holidays approach. Because while we will celebrate the hope and peace and comfort and joy of the coming season, we also recognize that it won't feel joyful at all times or for every person. This time of year can be really, really difficult. When the days become shorter and colder, that seasonal depression can so easily creep in. When many families are gathering around full tables, others will be alone, either without family or estranged from family or missing a family member for the first time, and some will have little or nothing to eat. When it comes time for all the boozy cocktails to be ever present at holiday parties and gatherings, those struggling with addiction will face added temptation at this time of year. When we're bombarded with the importance of lavishing one another in gifts, but the finances are just too tight, many will feel hopeless or inadequate. And for some, the weight of the world's hurt and brokenness will simply make it difficult to get into the Christmas spirit at all. And it is for this reason that we give thanks for a king who actually knows what it is to be a person in this broken and pained world. It is for this reason that we can hear the story of Jesus' crucifixion on this day and know for a fact that when we feel loneliness or pain or temptation or struggle, we are not alone. Because Jesus himself has felt every one of those things too. And still, it begs the question, what kind of king is that? It's not the kind that we would normally expect. Instead, it's the kind of king who willingly enters into the pain and struggle of his people just to more intimately know and love them. It's the kind of king who knows exactly what true justice looks like, because he has been the victim of injustice himself. It's the kind of king who prepares a place at his table for those who would never otherwise be invited to the party. The kind of king who eats with sex workers and tax collectors and sinners and impoverished people. It's the kind of king who challenges an established order that is oppressive and exclusive and harmful to people on the margins. It's the kind of king who would literally put his body on the line for the sake of the world he so loves. It's the kind of king who, in his most vulnerable moment, hanging on a cross, would extend words not of judgment or vengeance, but of forgiveness and mercy. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. And it's the kind of king who would ignore his own physical suffering to assure the ones suffering next to him that they will indeed be with him in paradise. That is Christ, our King. That is who we declare reigns in our hearts and in our lives on this day and every day. And Christ, our King, through the power of the resurrection and the Holy Spirit, is still at work, challenging the established order of this day and this time, and inviting us into that challenge with him. We live in a moment when there are always going to be a dozen or more things or people or institutions vying for our allegiance and our attention, especially at this point in time with the consumerism of the holidays, with the chaos of impeachment hearings in our nation, with the uncertainty of the future. We can feel pulled in a million different directions. But dear church, remember that if Christ is our King, then nothing and no one else is. If Christ is our King, then fear is not king. If Christ is our King, then capitalism and consumerism and money and Christmas gifts are not king. If Christ is our King, then elected leaders and our political parties are not king. If Christ is our King, then even death cannot say it is our King. When we declare that Christ is our King, we are saying that his life, death, and resurrection are what drives us in our everyday lives above all else. During our sending hymn today, the hymn that we will go out into the world singing, we will sing these words together. Give me Jesus, give me Jesus, you may have all the rest. Give me Jesus. What if that was the chorus of our lives? You may have all the rest. Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus, who is not some far away God, but who intimately knows our hurt, our pain, our struggle, and our loneliness. Give me Jesus, who is perfectly loving, perfectly just, and perfectly forgiving. Give me Jesus, who notices and lifts up the poor and vulnerable. Give me Jesus, who trampled on death and makes new life always possible. Give me Jesus, who takes the title of King and flips it on its head, showing us that true power is born from humility and compassion and sacrificial love. You may have all the rest. Give me Christ our King. Give me Jesus. Amen.